Hi, welcome to today's devotional podcast with Dr. Jacob Al. We are resuming our devotional on the series Naked and Not Ashamed. Naked and Not Ashamed. And we are continuing still with the female reproductive system. And today we're going to be looking at the fertilization of the egg, the fertilization of the female egg. And our text once again is taken from Psalm 139, reading from verses 13 to 14. You formed my innermost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and I know this very well. Psalm 139, 13 to 14. So millions of sperms begin the journey, but uh, a comparative few, just about 200, reach the tiny egg in the oviduct. This process of fertilization, as we discussed yesterday, uh, it begins with millions of sperms that are released from one ejaculation of the husband into the wife's vagina. And as we studied the way the vagina is, once these sperms are released in the vagina of the woman, these sperms begin to swim towards the entrance of the cervix of the woman, and they begin to travel uh, through the 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 oviducts that we discussed yesterday. Now they begin to travel through it, and yesterday we looked at the distance that they need to travel to be able to get to where exactly the oviduct is, where the egg is waiting to be fertilized. So there are why do we have to discuss this? It is important because when we discuss that, especially as we know these days, there is so much uh, tension around couples when it comes to fertility. And the devil has broken a lot of marriages these days on the issue of fertility. Now, some of these issues may not be very huge issues in the Western world or developed countries, but believe me, childbirth and fertility are huge issues that hinder marriages in developing countries. And for that matter, it's affecting relationships in families, and it's been a very thorny issue especially in African marriages. Uh, Whereas in the developed countries, uh, not having an issue could easily end up with the adoption of a baby. It's not very common in the developing countries, especially in Africa. Adoption is not, even though there is some good form of adoption going on, but culturally it's not wholeheartedly accepted as it is in the Western cultures. And again, these cultural differences causes a lot of pressure on marriages that needs to be looked at, and that is why, as part of intimacy in a marriage, and we need to talk about this process of fertilization. When couples are sort of equipped with the knowledge, then they become less stressful about the whole process, and then they also are educated from the little that they have received from their doctors, they are able to determine whether everything is okay with them. So that is basically the reason why we're doing this in this series. The fact that just having the knowledge sort of among both couples sort of gives you some sense of relaxation, so you can fully appreciate the fact that when the doctor tells you that there's nothing wrong with both of you, if you have already done the medical check, and they just tell you to keep praying and keep trying, in God's time it will happen. Having to know the process of fertilization also helps, so that even when you are praying, as I've shared before, you can be very specific in your prayer concerning these things. And that is why it is important that we sort of discuss these things and make the knowledge of the fertilization system available for couples, so they understand exactly what they are looking at. So millions of sperms begin their journey, but a comparative few, about 200, reach the tiny egg in the oviduct. Now, some sperms uh, attaches to the membrane that cover the egg, uh, and and activate it, so that finally one sperm may enter and fertilize. So even though millions of eggs are released from one ejaculation, it just takes about 200 of them to make it to the oviduct. From the journey from the cervix of the vagina to the oviduct, it just takes about 200 of them. And even then, the few that are able to probably reach the area of the oviduct, it is said that some of them, a few of those eggs will get attached to the membranes and cover the egg, okay, and activate it, so that finally one of the sperms may enter and fertilize. Now, the one sperm that enters the egg loses its tail and is absorbed, and its head proceeds on through the food-rich substance of the egg. So we did indicate yesterday that the sperm has a hairy-like tail that propels it to be able to move through the woman female reproductive system in order to get to the oviduct. So this movement, these eggs, these sperms, as the spermatozoa, which is the short form, which is the sperm, the tails propels it, enables it to swim, to be able to go through the distance. Now, so it immediately reaches the oviduct and gets attached to the membrane of the egg. It doesn't need the tail anymore. So it sheds off the tail, and then one of them will then attach it itself, the head of the, we also learned yesterday that the 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 egg is the food rich substance is in the egg. So the head of the sperm then goes to attach itself to this food rich substance area. This one tiny sperm carries the farthest thread of inheritance to the egg center. So, just this tiny egg sperm, as we mentioned yesterday, carries the genetic makeup of the father's traits, okay, to the egg center where the mother's threads of inheritance lie. So we know that the woman that the ovaries release the egg, that is swept into the oviduct. Uh, this X carries the genetical code of the woman, so to speak. So the sperm's head that gets attached to the center of the egg, the food-rich, substance-rich center of the egg, carries the genetic composition of the male, the father. So with the two of them then now amalgamate to begin to form the fertilized egg. So we see here these chromosomes contain thousands of smaller units called genes. So they are a bunch of chromosomes that then contains tinier things that is called the genes. So the genes of the man is from the egg, from the sperm, fertilizes or gets attached to the genes of the woman that specify the inherited characteristics of the child. Okay, so these chromosomes contain thousands of smaller units called genes that specify the inherited characteristics of the child. So the male sperm carries the sex determining chromosomes. So this is interesting. The male sperm is the one that determines that carries the chromosomes that determines the sex of the child. And the reason why I pause to stress this point is because very often, even in African marriages, sometimes a marriage can be dissolved or can be in problems simply because why? The woman is accused of being incapable of producing a male child. Male children are a priority in some African families because hereditary goes through the sons. And so some marriages suffer when they may be blessed with 4, 3 girls, but as long as a man hasn't come yet, sometimes the blame is placed on the female, the woman, the spouse. And relatives of the man may be urging him to go and take another woman who may be able to give him a male child, especially when they are of the royal lineage. It becomes a very big issue in Africa. But what we have just learned today is look, much as we want to blame the woman for her not being able to produce a male child, it is ironic that the studies here is telling us that it is the male chromosomes. It is the male chromosomes that determines the sex of the baby that is fertilized. So in few hours, the threads of inheritance of the two parents become knit together. In a few hours, the fertilized egg begins to divide and become a cluster of bubble-like cells. So this is the process that goes on. And it's interesting. It's very interesting because now we know this. As a man, if you are siding with your family to blame your wife for not giving you a male child, now you know that you are the one who is responsible for producing the chromosomes that determines the sex of the child. So don't put the blame, unnecessary blame, and women have to suffer through a whole lot when it comes to this in some cultures where there is the male dominance and the male child is looked at as the one who would inherit the father and continue with the lineage. Women go through a whole lot in situations like this. But today, we get to understand that. Now, when the man has an understanding that it is not his wife's fault that a male child is not born, then he will empathize with the wife and have an understanding and pray as they continue to wait for a breakthrough. Now, it will not be an issue where the woman is blamed and where the parents of the man even come with a woman from the village to give him a male child, as though the female children are nothing, are not children at all. As believers, we should not take to these cultural pressures that they unnecessarily put on families. So we need to understand, with the knowledge that we have gained today as men, we need not put our women through the unnecessary pressure that they go through as a result of the cultural expectations. They think that it is the woman who is responsible for bringing forth a male child. And so you hear, I failed to give my husband a male child, so he's taking another wife to give him a male child. No, you are not responsible. You, the wife, you are not responsible. It is the male chromosomes that are responsible for the determination of the sex of the child. This information is so kept away from women that they tend to blame themselves. So during the first 2 months of pregnancy, the mother's breast will enlarge and begin to be tender due to the change in the hormone level in her body. So morning sickness may occur temporarily. After about 27 days, the placenta, the so-called afterbirth, which is attached to the lining of the uterus and is linked to the embryo by the umbilical cord, okay, it starts to a variety of functions necessary to maintain the pregnancy. This is so powerful. We hear of the umbilical cord, we hear of the placenta, and very often we are not very much aware of what these organs, the role these organs play. But it's important to understand that after the egg is fertilized, it takes 27 days for the placenta, which is so called the afterbirth, what usually is known as the afterbirth, which is attached to the lining of the uterus, is linked to the embryo of the umbilical cord. Okay? And it starts a various of functions necessary to maintain the pregnancy. Very, very crucial and important organs, the umbilical cord, the placenta, the umbilical cord, and the embryo. Very, very crucial, because these are the organs that begins to feed the fertilized egg until it's sort of attached to the placenta. The placenta is attached to the uterus. And so you need to understand this. Now, then a series of things begin. Remember, we indicated earlier that immediately the egg is fertilized, the egg begins to produce the hormones that is needed for the to be attached to the lining of the uterus. It is the absence of these hormones secretion from the body that when there is no fertilization, that menstrual cycle begins. The bleeding, the blood flow begins because the lining, the inner lining of the uterus drops as a result of that, because hormones are not being secreted from the body. But now, when there is a fertilized egg, we see the role that this fertilized egg begins to perform, to produce. Um, it begins to secrete certain hormones that keeps the egg and the placenta attached to the uterus to keep the pregnancy from being involuntarily aborted. So there are a series of functions that begin immediately uh, when within the period of the 27 days after the fertilization of the egg. So what are these things that happen? It starts these functions. One of these functions is the production of the chronic hormone gonadotropin. gonadotropy is a hormone that is produced. It's called uh, chorionic hormone uh, gonadotropin. Very big words, but that's the hormones that it begins to produce. Since chorionic granadotropin raises to a high level for a short period, its detection in the urinal serves as a test for pregnancy. So it is these hormones that the levels are raised. Immediately you find the egg has been fertilized and it's attached to the uterus that begins to grow. Then these hormones are produced in a very high level and very high quantities. The granadotropy rises to a level for a short period. Is detection in urine. So normally there is a very effective way of testing whether a woman is pregnant or not, and it's the detection of these hormones in the urine of the woman that basically confirms pregnancy. So this test can be performed in few minutes with a high level of accuracy. The presence of this hormone in the female urine is in no doubt a confirmation of pregnancy. Now, this is a simple test you can now do yourself with a kit purchased from a pharmacy. So there is a pregnancy kit. Now they are very common, very easy to get. You can easily test if you are the type who are expecting a baby. You don't have to wait till a whole lot of things happen before you know you have picked seed. Even if you are not even sure after you've missed your menstrues or you haven't determined whether you've missed your menstrues, yes, you can go and get this simple kit. It's a urine test, and you test it, and the levels of these hormones in your urine is a sure confirmation that you are pregnant. And that's why the pregnancy test in this way is very accurate. This is a simple test that can be done. And so it can be acquired from a pharmacy. So another function of the placenta is the production of progesterone. Progesterone is one of the functions of the placenta. It produces this hormone. It takes over this important job as the ovary stops secreting progesterone. So we mentioned this, that the body of the woman stops secreting this progesterone when it is time for menstruation. And because the body, the uterus, the lining of the uterus begins to loosen up when these progesterone is no longer produced. So we did mention that after fertilization, the fertilized egg begins to take the role of secreting these hormones. And so one of the things that is produced when the egg is fertilized and the placenta is in place and stuck to the lining of the uterus, then the production of progesterone is taken over by this fertilized egg. Okay? It takes over this important job as the ovary stops secreting progesterone. This hormone from the placenta is vitally important in maintaining the pregnancy uterus and pregnant uterus and preventing the ovaries from developing another matured egg. So this is amazing. God intricately does these things. Now, if it does happen that another matured egg is fertilized, that's when we get to the situation where we have twins. And so that egg would also get stuck to the uterus, and they will be growing simultaneously in the cases of twins. And we'll talk about that later. So the hormone from the placenta is vitally important in maintaining the pregnant uterus and preventing the ovaries from developing another matured egg. Okay, so quietly, a tremendous change is taking place. The whole embryo is beginning to form from head to toe. And this is very important because, when we talk of when does life begin, a lot of views concerning this. But obviously, from the standpoint of God and creation, we know that life begins immediately this egg is fertilized, because Isaiah, the word of God says, "You knit me together." Jeremiah said, we hear from the book of Jeremiah that he even before he was knit in his mother's womb, the Lord knew him and called him. So we understand that life begins at this point. It doesn't matter how society would dismiss it in order to to sort of further their pro-choice arguments. But we do know that life has begun, because why? These bodies begin to form, the head and the toes. Every feature, every feature and the vital organs starts to include in the first 2 months. So these organs begin to form in the first 2 months of the fertilization of the egg. So, the heart begins to beat on about the 22nd day. Can you imagine? The 22nd day, the heart begins to beat. Now, and you tell me that that is still not a human being. Tell me that that is still not a human being. In the 22nd day, the heart beat, even though it is so small that it cannot be heard, it cannot easily be heard from for another 4 to 6 months. But the heart begins to form even after 22 days. So you tell me that you are not carrying a baby and it's just a blip and a clot of blood in your uterus. So you have the right to discard it. No, it is a human heart that begins to beat after 22 days. It's that you are not in the position of hearing it until probably it's about 4 to 5 months. So at the end of the first month, the embryo is only about the size of a small pear. That's how it is. But by the end of the second month, it is about 1 inch long and nearly weightless. Okay. At this time, the embryo is called the fetus. Okay. It can move the arms and legs, turn the head, open and close the mouth, and swallow. That's a human being doing. The fetus does these functions. It's a human being. Check. Listen, this is amazing. It's amazing that in the second month you find these things happening to the fetus in the womb, and you tell me that it's not a human being, and so you can discard it in a way that you want. But that's further from the truth. Anything that can perform these functions is a human being. Human life began even long ago. So, listen, the knowledge of this as couple, especially young couple who are waiting and patiently expecting a child, makes you relax because you understand the very system and the ways that this is going to take place. One, it helps you pray specifically. Two, it makes you not to become anxious and think that there's something wrong with you. Especially if you have done all the consultations with your doctors, they have examined your parts and told you that there's nothing wrong. It's just a matter of time. The Lord will bring to pass your desire. So now you understand how the sperm goes in and the way that this fertilization takes place. With such a knowledge, you can pray specifically. You can pray, and I've shared with you how I didn't even know this much when we got married, and we 2 3 years we're not having any issue. How I began to pray specifically when I knew that it was a weak sperm count that was responsible. It made me, even in the act of sexual intercourse with my wife, to be praying and asking the Holy Spirit to strengthen any of my sperms to be able to make the journey, the trip. Now, I didn't know it took 1.5 hours for it to travel that long. But all I knew was that my egg, my sperm were weak to be able, or the sperm count was low. I probably was not being able to produce the 2 million of eggs, of sperms that we have learnt about today. But what I was praying was that whatever the number they are, Lord, just strengthen one of them to be able to penetrate through and swim through to fertilize my wife's egg. I didn't know that it had to go through all these things. Imagine if I had knew, I would have been even more specific. But the little that you know, when you are